So, before we begin the intros, let's just give a round of applause to Lesley and Frank for being part of this event. So, we'll start with Lesley, and just quick introduction, how you got into sales, what you're doing now, and one interesting thing.
Okay. I got into sales because I wanted to be a teacher, and I figured out that if I wanted to raise a family and put my kids through college, that I would have to do something else first. The importance of sales was I was incredibly curious about how businesses were built. And I figured that sales would be one of the best ways to understand how businesses were built, what made them successful, what caused them to fail, what were the key ingredients involved in growth. So just as far as what I've done in sales, I've been an SDR. I have gone through the ranks, and I've done everything to enterprise sales. I've lived and died in enterprise sales by the large deal wins and the large deal losses. I've had both. Today, I am the Vice President of Commercial Sales and Sales Operations at Box. I've been there for 5 years. Prior to that, I was a couple other different companies. Remedy was the first one that I worked for a long, long time ago. Some of you probably weren't even alive then. And then I worked for a company called Informatica. These are the bigger companies that I worked for, MySQL and then Box, all of which were pre to post IPO companies. I like companies that are in that high growth phase. It's the most interesting to me. It's where you get to build teams. And I love to build teams. Box has been incredibly interesting because it's this whole SaaS world came into the forefront, I would say, at the time when I was there. And it's the first time that I've actually worked for somebody that has never been in business before, in the case of Aaron and Dylan. And Aaron is, if you guys haven't met him, is an amazing person. He's a visionary, and he's proof that the leader of your company can be the brand of your company. So the little known fact. Well, I'm going to relate this to sales. So how many of you guys like incentives? Okay, I'm going to connect two things here. So one of the best ways to motivate people is to drive an incentive that is connected to somebody's personal desires and wants, right? So when I was in Informatica, I worked for a VP of sales who figured out that I was a huge horse person. And I must have told him a story at some point about how I found it amazing that 60-year-old men played polo, and that if they could do it, I could do it. So as for hitting, I think it was a mid-market mid-year goal, he got me polo lessons. So I went and played polo, and it was awesome. So my little known fact that nobody would know.
Awesome. Great.
Hi, my name is Frank Swain. I am Chief Revenue Officer at ToutApp, which means I look after the pre-sales and post-sales activities here. Prior to Tout, I was very fortunate to be at some great companies. AppDynamics, I was the first head of sales. I was there for about 3.5, 4 years. Prior to that, I was at Splunk, and I was their first head of global sales. Grew that from 0 to about 40 million. Let's see, the other question was how to get started in sales. Well, the first thing I sold was Kool-Aid. When I was about 8 years old, me and my little brother set up our cart in front of the house. And he did all the schlepping. My mom made all the Kool-Aid, and I took care of all the transactions. And it was kind of fun, and I probably got the bug there. And then I sold pots and pans in college, and that was a real sales and learning experience. Had the police called on me, got physically thrown out of houses. It was you had to learn how to handle the objections and all that. But I was always attracted to sales because that's where the fast money was, and that's where I saw folks, having great success, driving the nice cars, wearing the nice watches, and living beyond their means, which is right up my alley. So I was a great role model for all the sales teams I started. So little known facts, I don't know about that one. You don't want to hear about Sing Sing, right? It was only 2 years. I got out on good behavior. Yeah, little known facts. Well, I really, let's see. I don't know, I really enjoy seeing folks achieve in their careers. And I think that's what has led me to be a sales leader and a sales manager.
Excellent. So we're going to be talking about this thing called scaling sales teams, right? So I think we just right off the bat, what do you think about scaling a sales organization? What is changing? And what are the triggers around scaling an organization? When do you pull that trigger? And are there different stages of growth when you talk about scale? And I think we have some very different perspectives here because obviously, Lesley, you're at Fox and seen a certain amount of growth. Frank, you're here at Tout, but all of your experience has been at the very early stage. So maybe you could share your experiences around scaling at those levels. And maybe we can start with Frank first.
Sure. Well, I would say that it's there are different stages in the life cycle of a company, and the early stages, the first year 1 to year 5, you scale differently than say years 5 to 10, and then from 10 to 15. And so, but one thing that applies in all of the stages, I would say, is the importance of planning and adequate planning. You need to figure out what your capacity is. You need to figure out what is the right amount of quota to hand out. What's the reasonable number of transactions that a team can handle? What's the ramp time? What's your turnover going to be? All those sort of things. That applies for a 4-person company as well as a 400 or 4,000 person company. You really have to spend a lot of time in terms of getting to scale and scaling out of where am I going to be 90 days, 180 days, a year, 2 years from now.
Okay.
I think to add to that, in that understanding the scale is understanding what a repeatable process looks like. Like what does success look like? What are the components of success? Can you make that repeatable? And if you start to see certain motions occurring over and over again and you can repeat that, then that's an indication. I also agree with what Frank's saying, is the individual of it, you have to figure out what does the yield need to look like? What is a successful rep yielding that causes you to believe that you can bring another one on? I think early on, it's incredibly important to stay true to that and make sure that you don't bring people on too fast, because you can get really stuck in that trying to manage people where you don't have that repeatable process and you can't teach them. That's really difficult.
And through that process, I mean, are there any sort of methodologies or approaches that you've worked with that kind of helped you get there or kind of figure out repeatability?
Oh, maybe I'll take
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, I'll take a crack at that one. I would say, over time and having done this a lot, I've created my own sort of methodology that I use where I look for that repeatable process. I think when you're doing velocity, you need to look at a couple of different things. You need to look at what's the inbound velocity that's coming at you. What's the capacity to actually address that? And then what's the outcome that you're getting from that? So you kind of need to look at it in those 3 stages. And also you need to look at there's a change that happens in a scale that goes from side-by-side selling and teaching to starting to have things like camps, right? And you kind of need to know when that's going to happen. It might be when you see 5 people all coming in at the same time, because it's going to put a burden on all of the folks who are currently selling. So I really look for those kinds of things as far as are we getting the inflow that we need to actually support the people coming in? is the activity that going on, the selling motion going on repeatable? And do we have enough people doing it? And then as you bring, as you bring 4 or 5 people on, what are we doing to increase the speed of ramp for them without taking down the rest of the sales organization?
Right.
So those would just be those are much more pragmatic things. I mean, there's all kinds of other different things that you can look at. But
Yeah, I agree. For me, I would say that what's really important is that you have a methodology. And whether, much like yourself, I've developed my own methodology, largely based on customer-centric selling. And whether you're using customer-centric selling, Taz, Miller, Hyman, Sandler, Medic, there's a bunch of great Challenger, right? There's a bunch of great methodologies that are very applicable for enterprise selling. It's important that you have one and you adopt one. And then it's really important that you back that up with things like sales stages that support and back up whatever your methodology is going to be. And then you need to equip your managers to be able to inspect what they expect as it relates to that particular sales methodology and where your deals are in their sales stages.
Maybe could you just share some of the basic elements of customer-centric selling just for folks
Sure.
who may not be familiar with it?
Sure. So customer-centric selling is all about matching your solution to customers' pain. So if there's no pain, there's no change. And if you can't align your solution and the value of what you're trying to sell to the pains and the objectives of what your customer is trying to accomplish, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to waste a lot of time. You're going to have a lot of meetings. You're going to miss a lot of forecasts, and you're going to get fired. So, you got to.
The last one is.
You got to figure out how you're going to map the value of what you're selling to your customer's pain. And customer-centric selling is a great framework to allow you to do discovery, to extract valuable information about what's important to the key stakeholders, how to map out the account, which is now called, we were laughing about this, account-based selling is very popular. But if you've sold to any big enterprises, you've been doing this for years. You don't sell to General Electric without doing some account-based selling, or you'll get fired. But customer-centric selling is a great framework to enable all that.
Yeah, it's funny how ABM is, I guess, the new sexiness in sales and marketing.
Right.
But we've been doing things like target account selling for like how long?
Forever.
Right?
Yeah.
When I was at Siebel, that was kind of our religion, how we actually developed our territories.
Right.
I want to move on to hiring, because Lesley, you brought up a really good point about bringing on people and really calibrating that, because that's where I think a lot of, particularly like early stage startups, can really get tripped up, because they maybe make a mistake in thinking, oh, we found repeatability. They bring on the 20 reps right off the bat, and then for some reason the wheels fall off.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could just share some of your approaches around hiring, talent, and maybe an approach that actually makes sense as opposed to just bringing on boatloads of reps all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest challenge there is if you bring on people fast, you have to make sure that you maintain the quality or the success criteria and not give that up. And that's really, really hard when you're under pressure to meet numbers. The way I've always looked at it is there's a rubric that we all agree on, and we, being the management team, agrees that this is the rubric that we want to hire to. And the reason it's the rubric that we want to hire to is because it's been proven to be successful. And my other philosophy on this is that those people that you bring in, especially if you're managing SDRs through selling heads, those people are going to be the leaders of the future. So you really need to think about, do these people have the capacity and the capability to, I think, number one, learn? Are they curious? And one of the things we used to do is, are they articulate and can they write well? Those things are critically important today. It used to be that in sales it would be people like me. Like, the reason I want to go into sales is because I like people and people like me. Well, that's not, these days that doesn't work, and it actually is not the foundational piece. For our rubrics, we look for just this, first of all, curiosity is a big one. there's the soft one, which is fire in the belly. They have something to prove, and when you talk to them, they can actually articulate what they're trying to shoot for and what they have to prove. So those are some of the things that you can actually look at. Are they organized? That doesn't work. But you can then apply those other skills that you test, if you will, like the writing test. And we use the writing test not just to do the writing, but to see if they've actually digested and can understand what we're going to teach them. So it's also about, can they think creatively? When put in uncomfortable situations, are they able to take that content and deliver it in their own words? Because I'm a big believer that everybody has a different way of internalizing a message and then putting that out. So the rubric is critically important to me and staying true to the rubric. It's also having a methodology that you use when you hire people. In a situation where you're hiring 20 people, we used to do these things called drink and sings. And the reason we chose to do those was because we had all of the people who were going to be involved in the hiring process in the room at the same time. And the candidate went through all 6 of those people at the same time frame. And then at the end of that, we all sat down around a beer and we, excuse the phrase, scored them, right? We scored them against the rubric that we all knew. What I've found is when you have like 6 different interviews over the course of 4 different days and you're doing 15 different people, you lose sort of sight of who people are because they're such a blur. So we really tried to take an approach of concentrating that effort, concentrating our time and our brain power around getting those things solved so that we'd have a class of people, because that was the other big one, is we wanted to bring in classes so that everybody came into the organization, actually had a group of people that they could relate to and relate with, that they could go to as they moved through kind of that first 30, 60, 90 days, this group that they were attached to.
Really interesting point about thinking about classes, right? Because I've seen a lot of startups, they get the one SDR or the one rep, and
really difficult.
It just seems like that's like a huge risk point, because what are they measured against, and how can you actually learn from that, as well as actually provide the guidance to actually help that rep be successful? So Frank, you've been here at Tout since October of last year. So you started to see a lot of the ramp and started to think about the hiring process and starting to build that in place. So what are some of the things that you're putting in place at Tout and some of the things that you've learned from your previous experiences at early stage startups that you're applying to hiring?
Sure, absolutely. I would say the main thing I've learned from the last 3 or 4 companies has been that as you start to grow and you start to scale, it breaks down as soon as you start layering in your next line of managers. And that's where it's really important that you have a process around screening, hiring, and interviewing your candidates, much like what Lesley was describing. I believe in having a rep profile or a candidate profile doc for the various roles. And I look for 3 main characteristics. First one is intelligence. And particularly if you're in technology sales, we're solving complex problems for our customers. And so smart people are going to figure it out. They're going to figure out what the value proposition is, and they're going to figure out how to match that to the customer's pain. And then the next characteristic is strong character, and then drive. So, find folks with those 3 characteristics. Those are what I call intellectual athletes, and you equip them with the right amount of enablement and training, and they're going to be superstars.
It's interesting you bring up the point about athletes. There's been this whole idea of, well, you should hire athletes for the discipline aspect. What's actually interesting, you brought up the fact about intellectual
For me,
horsepower.
that's an aspect, and there's a lot of very successful folks here at ToutApp that were college athletes, for example. But to me, that's one aspect of, they're competitive, so they have drive. And if they're intelligent, it comes out over time because they're able to figure out these complex things that we're trying to explain.
So it's
And then the last one on that one is curiosity.
Curiosity. It's funny that you bring up curiosity because when I had I actually had Mark Rivera speak at one of my events previously, and that was the number one thing he actually brought up.
Good one for me.
In the HubSpot hiring process, it was all about curiosity. They'd had specific tests
Yep.
in the process to kind of tease out curiosity. The other thing was actually empathy, which is an interesting point. So one of the things that they would do is they would have folks do projects before, but also after they hired. So I'd actually want to get to this point around onboarding, right? Because you can hire a lot of reps, but I just think that onboarding is so critical for ongoing success. So what have you found just from the onboarding perspective that you've been able to build some repeatability around and some level of success?
So we take onboarding really seriously at Box, and that's because we've learned from our mistakes. The worst thing you can do is invest all of this time in hiring somebody and onboarding them, let's say through a camp, which could be a week or so, and send them out to the field, and then they're kind of left to their own devices. And 6 months later, they're not successful and they move out. That costs the company a huge amount of money. So we started, when I first started, we started with what we called Box Camp, which was a 5-day kind of intensive training of all of different aspects of Box, whether that was, our vision, our culture, but also product knowledge and how do you use systems. Well, as you can imagine, you come out of that, your head's about to explode, right? And that content, the amount that you internalize is so small, and the biggest challenge that people have when they're not in HQ is how do they access that content when they need it, right? So, and how do we actually help them continue to build their knowledge? So what we've created at Box is sort of the first Box Camp, and then we have 30-day program, and then we have a program after that. We call it Accelerate, which is 12 learnings, and those are all, the learnings are classes that they take online, and then there's a certification at the end of that. And then we have the Box Sales Playbook, which is really the methodology that Frank was talking about. That's encapsulated. And we call it the Box Sales Playbook because it actually encapsulates a lot of these different methodologies that we've found to be most successful at Box. Some of it's Medic, some of it's Sandler, some of it's, a big part of it is the Challenger methodology. But it isn't one of those. So we actually decided to build that. So we built that playbook, and that was done in conjunction with our most successful managers and our most successful salespeople. So it was really taking those things from the successful folks, codifying that, and then layering on top of that what we call our master's program. And that's really those people who have been proven to be successful actually talking about those plays in videos so that then people take those classes. So what we found to be really important is it wasn't the professional telling them this, it was the people who their peers telling them what works in a given situation. The biggest part of that is we use it in conjunction with a set of analytics that are KPIs. One is based on pipeline, and one is based on just engagement with accounts. And we can take people who've been there for 2 or 3 years and actually pop them into one of these classes based on where we're seeing the need for coaching. So it's making sure that you take that knowledge not beyond that initial Box Camp where people are indoctrinated, and make sure that they continue to have access to those tools and skill building opportunities in ways that they can actually digest them. So that's what we really can focus on.
So in the later stages, you have a lot of infrastructure you can build in to support this, right?
Yes.
It is a journey as opposed to an event.
We call it, so just like a customer has a journey, an account rep or a box seller has a journey that they go through, and they're going through the different various stages of ramp and then past ramp. And sometimes they have to come back to the beginning of the journey to relearn a skill that maybe they missed.
Right. And so contrast that with, Frank, your experience has been at the very earliest stages and building up the teams, and in the chaos of that early stage startup where there's a lot of things and a lot of uncertainty. What have you found to be successful to kind of get those reps up to speed, how to maybe ramp them up quickly, and to give them the type of training and coaching that they need to be successful?
Sure. Implement a sales enablement program right away. So one of the first things I did was I took one of our best and brightest here at ToutApp and promoted her to Director of Sales Enablement. And so we have a very rigorous program that's rolled out on a weekly basis. And we take one skill set at a time. Think of it as one skill set needed for every stage of the sales cycle. And we train on that. We do role play. We do some training about the content that needs to be learned. And we test in and test out. So we test in before we start the training. Then we test on the way out to get a gauge for how well are we doing, how well it's getting absorbed, and that sort of thing. And I really learned this part the hard way by not having a rigid enablement program in some of the early stages companies I've been involved in. And what ends up happening is I run around like a crazy person, trying to get all the deals closed at the end of the quarter. And so that really isn't what scaling is all about. It's about equipping, enabling, and training up your sales team to go out and be the crazy people.
It's actually a really good point that you bring up, because how many times as managers and sales leaders do we find ourselves getting engaged at the deal level, right? And sometimes that's appropriate, right? Let's not make that mistake,
Absolutely.
but
Sure.
there are many times when it's probably way too early or not appropriate for you to be closing a deal on behalf of your reps. So it's just a really interesting fact of trying to enable them to take that ownership.
That's a very good point, because there's only so much magic, and I am a Jedi.
Yeah, we'll do the Jedi portion of the talk later.
There's only so much magic that can be done at the end of the sales cycle if the proper work hasn't been done earlier on.
So I want to talk about the idea of success, right? And ensuring success, because it's one thing to get people ramped up and trained, but there's also the motivational aspect.
Mm-hmm.
It's so critical because of the ups and downs in sales, and as you're growing, let's face it, quotas never go down, territories never grow. So how do you keep the excitement and energy going on the teams, particularly when you're going at 1,000 miles an hour, to at least inject a little bit of maybe fun, levity, and excitement and motivation? Frank, maybe you can share some of the things you've done here at Tout.
Sure. And this ties into culture also. And the culture needs to be about winning. And if you're in sales, you're winning when you're closing deals and making commissions, and spending more than you're making. I think that's success for most sales reps. But it's really about create a culture where success is celebrated. We ring the gong. We send out an update email. We try to make a big deal out of all the wins that come across the bow, and that's a big part of keeping the energy up. And then setting the goals so they're attainable. So if everyone has a goal that nobody's going to reach, no one's going to be motivated. So you've got to set your goals so that they're going to be attainable, and then show lots of love and praise to your performers.
Yeah, and I love the fact that here at ToutApp, you've encapsulated this idea of I close deals, right?
Yeah,
so it's
right.
like just this real, like this culture really coalesces around that, and I think it's really exciting. I see it in the kind of energy of the reps as they're on doing the calls and reaching out to people. So Box, bigger company.
Yeah.
How are you keeping the energy up?
Well, I think a huge part of it goes to culture, and it's really is leading from the front. I also think that you have to get the entire company bought into the vision that you have about winning. It's not just the team winning. I winning. It's the team winning. One of the things we have at Box, and I think probably a lot of companies do this these days, but we have win notifications. And there are different levels. So, and that win notification has a gong size associated with it. And that's been there since the beginning, and that's taken many different forms as far as how it shows up. The other thing that we do is we have just obnoxious prizes. And it's the prize that you get to carry around for the quarter because you were the #1 rep, and it's a visible sign that you are successful. And I think it's super important to have those visible signs. I actually see a lot of them around here, which I think is really cool. And then the other one that has been really important for me, especially at Vox, is coming up with a theme that people can attach to that is not just about, you know, doing the deals. It's about how does that move my career forward.
Sure.
And you know, for this year, it's LEAP for us. It's learn, engage, amplify, and perform. So those are all things that we're trying to do as a company, and perform is, in the context of perform, it's about, you don't perform just for the company, you perform for yourself. And what does that performance mean to you? And what can we do to encourage you to increase your performance? You know, I also, there's nothing, you know, better than the leaders of the organization showing up at the end of a quarter and being there with all of the sellers. I think it's critically important. It shows we're in the trenches with you. It's been a difference maker for me in being able to retain top talent because they feel like they've got the company behind them, that they're not going this alone. And I think that's incredibly important when you're in a selling situation. You know, you live and die by your number. You live and die by the commit you gave. And I think you can have that kind of culture of living and dying by that if people feel like the entire company is behind them. In our case, at the end of last year, Aaron, you know, was on the 6th floor sitting with us the whole day, and that says a lot without saying anything. You know, he didn't need to say anything. He just sat there at the end of the set of cues.
I think it's so great that you talk about leadership and how important it is, because we can have, you know, and I've seen it. I've seen very positive sales cultures, and I've seen very negative sales cultures, and honestly, a lot of times it really depends on the CEO, and being the advocate, being there on the floor, being with the sales reps, and giving the support day in and day out. That's so critical, you know, just to enable that sales culture. So, and talk about just, you know, maybe just the motivation piece a little bit more. I mean, sometimes you have to crack the whip,
Yeah.
right? So, what do you do around the urgency aspect? You know, when you're starting to drive towards the numbers and it's getting towards the quarter, getting towards a year, what are you trying to do to make sure people remember, you know, we can have fun, but we've got to hit the goals?
You want me to start with
Yeah,
that?
yeah, go ahead.
You started before? I think it's all about consistency. And you have to have a very clear, we talked about sales process before.
Right.
And a lot of it comes from not as you get to the last week of a quarter or the last couple of days. It has to be consistent all the way through the quarter.
Right.
And I think it's not the pressure, it's the consistency of the expectation. That when somebody says commit, people know what a commit is, and that you're asking the questions to suss out where the gaps might be. And that goes to being in it. You know, as far as people, you know, kind of cracking the whip, as you say. I think if you build the right kind of culture, people become accountable for doing their own whip cracking.
Right.
And I also think by setting the expectations and being clear and direct in what your expectations are, when somebody starts to go off track, you know, you bring them back on track, and if it isn't working, you're pretty clear about it. I think the worst thing you can do is have non-performers hanging around. And that's my way, I guess, of cracking the whip, is that non-performance, you know, is given a certain amount of time, and everybody knows what it is. And if it isn't happening, and it consistently isn't happening, then that person isn't there. And the reason you do that is not because you like to let people go. It's because it wasn't working for some reason. And the people who are there, who are performing, need to see that, because if you don't do that, they start to think, well, what you say is not followed by what you do.
I think that's critically important. And Frank, what about your
Yeah, for
perspectives?
me, it goes back to hiring right. So if you hire people who have drive and are driven, they're going to be as hard on themselves as any manager is going to be. So it's really important that you try to bring the right folks into the organization. And for the folks here who are reps, if you're not driven, you're in the wrong career. So that's just a characteristic that I've seen in successful reps over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, the drive, the motivation shouldn't have to come from
A
outside.
lot of it's got to come from within. That's right. But then, as a management team, we need to set the clear expectations of what acceptable performance is, what unacceptable performance is, and give regular feedback as to how you're doing against that performance. And if you do that right, if the clear expectations are set up front, if their feedback mechanism loop is in place so that teams and reps know how they're performing against what the expectation is, then problems really get handled on their own.
Another aspect I want to just get back to is this idea of the team, right? And I said this in the beginning, this idea of like sales is this lone wolf culture. I think it's really changing. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I think maybe it's a millennial thing, maybe it's just a change in the environment of sales, but can you just speak to maybe just like teamwork and things that you maybe developed to just, to get people out of the sole focus, it's all on me, it's all on me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point. One of the things we talk about is if an individual makes their goal and the sales team fails, then we all lose, right? So I think that's part of the culture as well. I think, Frank said it, I think you have people, if you have a group of people who are driven and they have a lot of similar characteristics, they're going to build this concept of team themselves. And actually, you want to take advantage of the fact that folks are competitive. So at Box, not because I said you should go name yourselves, but the managers all named their teams, and they have themes around what those teams are and what they stand for. And I think that part of what they stand for is their culture and the way they live as a group. And that doesn't come about through it doesn't come about artificially. It comes about because of the characteristics that you've brought in the management layer. I think one of the hardest jobs in sales is first line manager.
I totally agree.
Yeah, it is the place where you actually have to succeed through other people, and it's the first time you have to do it. And as they say, it rolls downhill. And that person is sort of the person. That person plays the role between what's happening in the trenches and the upper management, and oftentimes is the person who gets the most pressure when it comes to the end of a quarter. And I think what I've observed in those folks and those folks who are successful is they create a culture where we win and lose together. One of the best managers I had when I was early on in my career was like, guys, I don't care how you get to the number from the standpoint of whether you share deals. So like if your person sitting next to you isn't going to make their number this quarter, then you guys can do horse trading. He didn't care, and what he was trying to do is actually create a culture of winning as a team. There's all kinds of different ways to do it, but and then the other thing is going back to the concept of we want to make this fun. I mean, we spend so much of our time at work that you create these contests, and they're silly contests maybe. And there are things, that like I think we have a group that is actually at the baseball game today. This afternoon they went to the baseball game, and it's because we had a new product that came out, and they did the most selling of that product over the course of the quarter. You got to do that, and you got to do those things outside of the office where people have a chance to get to know each other and get to relate to each other without kind of the pressure of the selling. I found that, I mean, the people that the first teams I was on and selling, I am still really good friends with those people. I rely on them when I have challenges and, I need to solve a problem. One of them actually works for me. I met her in the lobby of my first sales job. So,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, having mentors, that'd be a whole other topic, but I think mentorship is an important thing, and hopefully this is something that we can foster here with the Enterprise Sales Meetup. Just out of curiosity, Frank, was there like a mentor that guided you, or?
Several over the course of my career.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we could all speak to the fact that there was always like one person, maybe like a few people. For me, it was a sales consulting manager. She was amazing, technically gifted, but always managed to ask the right questions in the right situations. And that's how I learned how to ask the right questions when I was in sales deals. So big fan of mentors. I want to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit more about the guts, the actual technology and processes and operations. And obviously, Lesley, part of your title is sales operations, so you live this world. And Frank, I mean, we were talking about this before, but just the importance of sales operations into making, or basically being that foundation of a high velocity sales engine. So maybe Frank, you could share
Sure.
your thoughts or visions on that.
Well, for me, you can't be successful at this idea of high velocity sales without strong sales operations. It's really critical. You need to be able to remove friction wherever it exists within your sales process. And, sales operations has a lot to do with that. How hard is it to get a quote generated in front of a customer? And by the way, why is it important to put a quote in front of the customer? Anybody from ToutApp here? Because they're not going to buy if they don't have a quote. It's really important. You gotta be able to generate a quote easily and get it in front of the customer, by way of example. The other item that sales ops plays a really strong role in is how hard is it to do data entry in your CRM? So I don't know any sales rep that likes to do data entry. Nobody likes to do it. And most of them don't do a good job at it. And what that means is you end up having bad data that you're running reports and dashboards and things and trying to run the business on. So the more you can remove friction out of all these areas, which is all about sales operations, the smoother things are going to run. Also, sales ops has a lot to do with, we got to put together territories that folks are going to be able to crush it. We got to have, a deal approval process that is going to go through smoothly. So, I don't have to fight harder internally than I do externally to win the deal. And sales operations is a huge part of all that.
Yeah, so, I think Frank said it, if you want velocity, you've got to solve for putting your sellers into selling and not doing administrative tasks. I think I got into it, the reason I got into sales operations is because one of my first jobs, the sales leader was suggesting that the sales reps actually do all of the order entry. And I costed it out for him. I said, that person's costing you $200,000 a year. You can get 3 sales ops people to do that, and you really don't want those guys doing it because they'll quit.
Right.
And that's how I got into it. But what has been critically important in addition to everything that Frank said, I absolutely agree with everything he said. He's talking about making the part, the success part of the sale frictionless, right? You don't want to take hours to get a quote out because actually that's when you've got the engagement at the right point. The other thing that it's critically important with is sales reps never believe that their territory, that there's equity between territories. So you actually have to prove it to them.
No, you don't say it.
So we spend, the sales operations is, the foundational layers and should simplify the selling task by having the content and the data that is required to do your job in one place at the time you need it. Sales operations is also critically important to the planning that Frank talked about. So what are we doing this year? How are we going to scale that next year? What proof points do we have that we've met that criteria? And then sales operations oftentimes is the link between where are there gaps in people's knowledge? They're also the place where the rules of engagement, which everybody loves, exist. They're also a objective party that can deal with those situations where there might be questions about who gets credit for this or that. In my experience, the sales ops function is critically important because they're sort of the heartbeat with the rest of the company too. Right. So, you don't want to have your sales reps trying to go to the controller to actually get something done. You actually want somebody else facilitating that. And then as you add products on, they obviously are the ones that are putting those new products in. So I think sometimes companies forget how important this is early on, and they get into this sort of chaos mode, and then they're kind of throwing the sales ops function together. And I think some of that, Salesforce is a great company, but they made it really easy to create a CRM system, and that just becomes spaghetti. In our case, that did happen a little bit. So the build out of a sales ops function early on, I think, is critically important because it should provide, if you get the data incorrectly, and it's not always incorrect, and you're able to look at the data and provide trends to the sales leaders, as well as the sales reps, so that people have an idea of what they're doing well and what isn't working, so that they can make changes. And also it gives, if you look at it down to the AE level, it also can give at a high level, how are we doing? And it should give us information about whether we should be hiring or whether we should slow down.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I look at sales ops from two different perspectives. And Frank, you crystallized this really, really well, which was sales ops is about the repeatability. It's about getting that process and having that engine that supports repeatable things. So your reps are doing the right tasks at the right time and doing that effectively and efficiently.
Yes.
But at the same time, to your point, Lesley, it's really about the metrics. And so maybe we could, I'd like to open this up to the audience as well, but maybe just share like some of the key metrics that you look for and what's important versus what's maybe just vanity.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in, especially in a velocity sale, making sure that people see transactions. Do they actually have enough transactions to hit their numbers? And how does that pipeline grow over the course of a quarter? Mm-hmm. And providing that, but not providing that in just for that AE, but providing that with a baseline level of what a successful AE looks like. Because if they don't have the context for what success looks like, from the standpoint of what's the right ACV, how many transactions do I need to have? What's the makeup of those transactions? If you don't give them a formula for what success looks like, then it's very hard to actually expect success.
Sure. Frank?
So I look at 5 key metrics: ASP, average sales cycle time, close rate, ramp time of the rep, and turnover of the rep. And with those 5 key metrics, I can build the necessary pipeline coverage that needs to happen, the dropping in new teams at the right point in time. Sure. Because there's ramp time and so on involved. How much, and then I take it backwards even from there. If I know that I need 3.5 times my expected number in pipeline at the start of the quarter, and I convert 2% of the leads that come in, well, I can reverse engineer, what marketing needs to be doing to drop more leads in the top of the funnel. But for me, it comes down to those 5 key metrics. What's your average ticket size? How long does it take to sell it? And what's your close rate? And then how long does it take for the rep to ramp up?
Sure, sure. I want to open up just a few questions, and obviously Frank, Lesley have wealth of experience. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand.
Hi. We can't see you, so just speak up.
And when you do ask a question, maybe you can share your name and the company you're from.
Yeah, my name's Drew Fleming, and I'm with a company called Buzzboard. And I have a question about the relationship between account management and sales. I'm assuming that you guys have account managers, people who are more focused on retention and growing existing accounts as opposed to new business. And I'm curious, from a structural standpoint, does account management end up reporting into sales? Are they 2 different silos? And then how do they coexist together?
Yeah. And I'll add on to that. It's an extraordinary question. I was actually having a conversation in New York about the criticality of customer success teams. Mm-hmm. And there was a point of view that maybe companies at the earliest stages aren't hiring at the customer success level or for that role early enough in their ramp up. So maybe we could start off with Frank and your perspective on account management.
Sure. Great question. For ToutApp, we believe that, first of all, we call them customer success managers. These are the post-sales folks that are responsible for driving adoption, driving enablement. They're responsible for the renewals and for upsells. Sure. They report into sales. And I think that's important, particularly in early stage companies, because you don't want competing agendas going at the same customer. Our competition is sales loft. Our competition is, Cirrus and these other folks out there. Our competition isn't our CSMs versus our AEs. And so we really want the message and the agendas aligned so that we're providing the highest value that we can to our customers. And the other part of the question was, there was a second part. Okay, well, I'm old, I forgot.
I guess the alignment between
Oh, right.
between AEs and, in this case, customer success managers.
Right, right. So we have very tight alignment between the AEs and the customer success managers. The AEs are the hunters, and the CSMs are really the farmers. And so we have really tried to align it such that the CSMs, I view it in very much a military campaign kind of outlook. The SDRs and the MDRs are the scouts. The AEs are your Marines invading the beach, and the CSMs are your intelligence. They have the intelligence on the account. They know the status of what's happening, and I look for the CSMs to deploy the AEs to say, hey, we got this group over here. We're not in this one over here. You need to go hunt over there and get some activity.
And actually, I mean, to follow on what you're saying, Frank, it's you made a good point earlier, which was this idea of land and expand, and how you
Right.
grow and how you scale your
Right.
company at the early stages. That you've been really successful in this land and expand approach. So I'm assuming that's what you talked about is kind of the basis of doing that.
Sure, absolutely, right. Happy customer buys more, and they buy more at a faster clip. All the big deals are done on the foundation of the land deals, assuming that, they can make a happy customer.
Yeah, I assume that's the same at Box.
We do have CSMs. When Box was at its earlier stages, all fell under sales. They're now part of the CS organization. I actually own the renewals responsibility, so we have it kind of in 3 different places. The sales reps that we have do both new acquisition and upsell, and the CSMs are responsible for retention. So they work as a team to make sure that team, to make sure that the company expands. To what Frank said, the CSMs are the intelligence. They have a different perspective on the customer, and the customer knows that. In our case, we made a decision that those folks should not be sellers or perceived as sellers, because we wanted them to have the relationship with the customer that was not selling, so to speak. But they are absolutely the intelligence in the accounts, and they provide that information to the AEs that are selling.
Okay. Another question? Up here. And again, your name, what company you're from.
Hi, my name is Juan Escobar. I'm with DivBot. And so I'm we're a company, startup in Palo Alto, tech startup, B2B SaaS. So I'm kind of salesperson number 1, and just been helping to scale our team. So we're going through a lot of growth right now. So I have a million questions, but one of the main questions I was curious to get your thoughts on was, what's the kind of relationship when you're building a early sales team that the sales team should have with, say, the product group? So for example, our early startup, 10 people, pretty much all of them are engineers, right? The ones who built the products. So I'm curious, like, when you're first starting a sales team, what kinds of things should you be doing with, say, the product side, or communicating with the product side to really have like a healthy relationship as you're building your early sales team?
It sounds like you're super early. So you're probably going through a lot of this challenge of you're trying to get a message out there,
Pretty much.
and you're not really sure if there's a product market fit.
Well, actually, just to really quickly explain, we're actually above $1 million in revenue annual ARR.
Okay.
So we do have a
Great.
product. We have hundreds of customers, but the thing I'm curious about is the internal relationship
Yep.
around
Sure.
like engineers that are on your team building stuff, and then you're the one out there talking to everybody and getting all the information, feedback. Like, what kind of relationship should exist internally within the company?
So thanks, Juan.
I have worked at early stage startups, so I can answer this just from my perspective. It has to be a tight one. And I think but at the same time, you can't keep going to them with one-offs. It has to be you take the input from the customer, package that up, rank it, and then go to the product marketing teams. The other one one of the reasons we started the win notifications and very clearly kind of walked in that win notification, walked through the storyline of what happened, was so those product managers and so the engineers would see the outcome of those products they were building. they need to feel as if they are part of the sale, and they are, because what they build is what the customer buys, and if what they're building is not what the customer cares about or is not solving a pain for the customer, then it doesn't matter. And so I've always been a big believer of having, at least in any company I've been in, of creating a relationship myself with the product development teams and the engineering teams, because they are so important. And a lot of times what happens is they get kind of put in the back room. They need to understand the value the product is providing to our customers, and they need to hear it from the customer.
Right, I agree with everything you said. What I would add is, particularly in early stage one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to put them in front of the customer. Get them on a go-to meeting, get them on a conference call, get them in front of the customer if they're nearby. You need to drag them out, co-opt them to help you make the sale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I absolutely concur. I mean, there's many startups where they kind of put this artificial wall between product engineering and the people that are out there in the field. And that's a very dangerous situation, because oftentimes inside the wall they could easily dismiss what you're finding out, because you're the intelligence in the field. You're finding out what the customer's challenges are, the problems, the things that they're telling you that are important. And if that's not filtering inside, it's going to be really impossible to deliver something that's going to be of high value. So get those folks out of the building.
We do a lot of that here at ToutApp. We also did a lot of it at App Dynamics and Splunk. And the engineers and the head of products would say, gee, I didn't think that's what they were thinking they were going to do.
I had no idea they would use it that way.
But they can answer the technical questions far better than I can. And then they come back equipped to deliver more of what the customers are looking for. So get them involved in your deals.
Thank you.
I think we had a question over here up in the front.
Steve Monteroso with Blue Jeans.
I see.
Pleasure. Juan, just really quick, one of the things I could tell you from leading small startups is you have to include those engineers in the wings as well. Make them feel part of that winning culture, because they'll feel vested into what you're trying to accomplish. On another note, a question I had for you two is, what advice would you give to a company who was in hypergrowth, and we were first to enter a space, and now competitors have caught up, right? And now we're kind of at that spot where we're transforming as a company, where now we need the revenue to kind of catch up to the salespeople we have, and we obviously want to retain them.
Sure.
Frank,
maybe-
take that one, Lesley.
It's great when everybody's coming after you. It means you're the leader first. So I think we all, any successful company is going to find themselves in that situation eventually, because they're winning, right? So people are going to start using the same messages, going into their customers and talking about the same kind of solution. As far as what that means to a sales organization, I am a big believer in focusing on where you're going and not looking at back, and making sure you're ahead of those who are at your coattails, if you will. That's sometimes hard, because you start to find yourself in competitive situations that you didn't find yourself in before. Tie this in with what we just talked about with regards to the product. Leaders need to understand what's going on in the field as it relates to what competitors are doing and saying, and marketing needs to be a part of this. So my strategy in any kind of competitive situation where you're trying to do this hypergrowth, and don't get me wrong, I've been through it a couple of times, and certainly been through it at Box. You sometimes have to pivot a bit, right? So in the case of Box, as people may or may not know, we pivoted from being a consumer company to being an enterprise company. And we got very focused on what our differentiation was going to be, and we made some big bets on that differentiation. In the case of Box, it was around security. In the case of Informatica, similar sort of situation, a lot of data warehousing companies, they were doing really well. They coined the phrase data mart, right? So they became very focused on the differentiation they were providing to the market was the ability to create a data mart that served a business purpose in a line of business, right? And they used that to do this land thing. And then they went back, they eventually grew back into that being a data warehouse, but everybody knew them as a successful data mart, and you could conduct the data warehousing. With Box, it's been all about security. It's the thing, we said, we are going to be the most secure content platform. And we are, we continue to be, and therefore people are trying to catch up. That doesn't mean that we don't have risks in other places, but that's what we lean into, and that's what we lead with. So I think you have to decide and focus on, and this is not a sales-only driven effort, it is a company-driven effort. And I think that the key to this is that the sales organization needs to coalesce around what it is, and they need to turn around and tell that to the rest of the company. And I've seen that happen in 3 different companies. So I think one of the biggest things is you need to make sure that your voice is heard. And I think that it has to be spoken as one voice. So if you have sales reps saying 16 different things, and they're saying, we're in these competitive fights and there's not consistency, then it's very hard to kind of coalesce around one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I find that like sales messaging is so key, right? Because if people are telling different stories, like, you have no idea, and and then you basically destroy differentiation. Any other, maybe a question over here?
Got away from that one?
I got away from that one, but there's like 2 or 3 questions that need to be asked about your circumstance. If the top line of your market opportunity is flattening out, then that's something you need to take a look at in terms of rebalancing how you're going after that market opportunity. So if it is still going at a steeper rate, then you need to look at your sales team and the structure to how are you going to optimize your sales organization, keep pace with that top line. So the first thing that comes to my mind is, what's that top line of your market opportunity doing? Is it continuing up like this, or is it starting to flatten out?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that happen actually back in the HR tech days.
Sure.
I was involved in a lot of the talent management systems, right?
Right.
We definitely top-ended that market.
Right.
Did so well, we penetrated, but then it became flat, right? And then you really got to dig in and find what your niche is. Question over here in front.
Yeah, hi. I'm Eileen Carey. I am the CEO and co-founder of Glassbreakers. We make enterprise software solutions for diversity and inclusion. Box was our first customer.
Awesome.
A long time ago, we made an SMB product. So my question is, I'm scaling my sales team right now. We're about to hit hyper growth. We've got really great enterprise customers. We have revenue coming through the door. I have to determine what our sales culture is. Now, you guys talked a little bit about competitiveness versus cohesive sales teams, right? Like ones who support each other. What are the pros and cons of creating a hyper-competitive sales organization versus creating one that kind of supports each other?
I mean, I don't know if there's a either or.
Yeah, I don't
You
think
want to
there's
try
really-
to.
I don't
If you're going,
Exclusive.
if you're just like the pros and cons, like if I were to say, okay, like, because I'm hiring BT Dubs, hiring 2 account executives right now, minimum deal size, 6 figures.
OTE,
So,
450.
Yeah, Fortune 1000 type deals. So anyways, so I have to make this decision, right? Do I hire 2 people who are going to be competing against each other? I know I'm going to learn from, their mistakes, how they do things. I don't have a sales background. I come from a marketing background. So I need to figure out, am I going to create like a really hyper-competitive sales organization with each other? Or do I do what you were talking about where, someone doesn't get their quota and it's the whole team comes together? Like in early stage companies, what are the pros and cons to that?
Yeah, so maybe I can answer that. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think people can be incredibly competitive with each other and be the best of friends. And I also think they can be incredibly competitive with each other and recognize that the success of the company is based on both of them succeeding. There's always a 1 and there's always a 2. Right? And everybody wants to be a 1. And to your point is they've got to have the drive to be the 1, right? I would never ever suggest you artificially create a hyper competitive sales organization.
Yeah,
The people you bring in the organization will do it themselves if you're bringing the right kind of people
I
in.
mean, I've been in those hyper-competitive sales.
Right?
Like, essentially, it's a boiler room, right? And that's literally the last thing that this world needs is more of that.
I come from Wall Street before
You don't want
tech, so
that.
yeah.
And that's not, and I also don't think if you're selling, sorry, because I'm passionate about this, I also don't think if you're selling to Fortune 1000 companies that will work for you, because the engagement they will have with those customers is going to be a long-term relationship. And if you're creating a hyper competitive environment, people will start to do unnatural acts to get deals.
I mean, I've seen that, firsthand with, people trying to steal deals, people hiding deals from different territories when they should be doing splits. So it creates a level of negativity that filters across the entire organization.
So, look, my take on it is that you need to be in alignment with your sales organization of what the outcome is.
Mm-hmm.
What's the desired outcome? And then build out accordingly to how you're going to get to that outcome.
Maybe we'll take one last question. Up here. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry for the rest of the folks. Maybe we'll stick around for a little while longer to ask, to answer questions individually, but please.
Yeah, my name is Lucas Crawley. I'm an account executive at Lyft. Brand new to the sales cycle, or to our type of sale. And I guess my question to both of you guys both come from sales backgrounds from the bottom to the top. What do you suggest to those that are maybe struggling in the sale at that point in time? They're a good rep, they're very driven, but maybe deals aren't coming in the door as frequently as they thought they should be. Do you go back to methodology and try to reteach them something, or are you putting them with somebody that maybe is a top rep and trying to implement their strategy? Or I guess what's your suggestion from both of your experiences, and even yours as well?
Sure. Frank, you want to?
Sure. So there are several different acumens that you need to take a look at. So, are there enough top of the funnel opportunities, pipelines coming into their territory, or whatever it is they're expected to manage, and they're just either not able to convert them or move them along in the sales stage? Are they able to get them through the sales stage and not get them over the finish line? Are they responsible for prospecting and they don't want to prospect, so they don't prospect? So there's probably 4 or 5 different things that you need to look at to determine if it's something you can turn a dial to help fix, or do you have the wrong person in the role?
What I would add to that is when you're building territory, there always is a certain amount of building that goes on, and it is a grind. And even if you have those things happening, because you have to move them forward, and they're coming, if they're coming in the top, there's a certain process of discovery and getting the sales process going. I think you do need to have a baseline. Like, is there a baseline that you can go look at that shows, as I said earlier, that is a successful rep? In other words, the velocity or the number of things that are coming in and how quickly they're moving through the stages. I think it goes back to what Frank was saying about all of the different pieces and parts that we talk about. There are times where everybody has a dry spell. I think if you can look to the activities that somebody is doing and start to kind of analyze the activities and what is or isn't converting, I think that goes back to also what Frank said. So it's a series of steps of diagnosing, and then I think you also have to look at, is the person in the right job? And hopefully you've done that through the process of the hiring rubric, and that will play out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, quite honestly, there's some people that may not be great at opening up new territories. They may not be oriented toward new business or that kind of hunter style of sale, but they can still sell. It's just that they need to be maybe in a different role, like customer success or account management. I want to ask one last question. I ask this of every panel. Can you maybe share a book, maybe a movie, whatever it may be, but something that you found really inspiring of recent? I'll start with
Sure.
Frank.
So,
go ahead.
2 books are recent that I really liked a lot. First one was Jack and Susie Welch, Real Life MBA. A lot of great takeaways from that. The other is Mark Roberts' book, Sales Acceleration Formula.
Yeah.
Got a lot out of that. thinks about things the same way I found that I think about things. And so he does a great job of laying out, you know, metrics and planning and systems and automation and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with the Mark Roberge book. It's a great one for anybody who's doing velocity sales and is looking for repeatable processes. It's got a great set of formulaic templates that you can use, and you know that are a good starting point. You know, my big one, two big ones right now is I'm a big believer in the challenger sale. Teach, tailor, and take control. I'm sure you guys haven't heard this one, but the other one that they've just recently come out is called the Challenger Customer.
Yeah.
And you know, I think I just finished that one, and the reason I like that book is because it brings the whole company into the process, and talks a lot about the insights that you provide to your customers, teaching them things that they don't know. And that leads to making sure that our marketing organization are providing those insights that customers react to. And all of that goes to it being about where the customer is, not where we are and not our technology, but what is the customer problem that you're trying to solve, and where are they having challenges. And sometimes I think kind of starting way up at the top of the funnel when we're talking about our messaging, sometimes that can be very internally focused and not really looking at what the problems are that exist out there today for those folks who are trying to buy from us.
Yeah, I love all those suggestions, particularly when you talk about the challenger sale, where I think people got the misconception about what challenger sale really is all about. Because they think challenge, and you said, oh, well, you know, put a bunch of like really aggressive people out there and start to badger customers, which is like not the message at all. It's really about sales messaging and getting the message and those insights well organized and coordinated across organization. Mark Roberge's book, I think, is great as well, just because the piece I liked most was the hiring stuff.
Yeah.
I thought that was really brilliant.
He has a great rubric.
Yeah. So, thank you, Lesley. Thank you, Frank.